Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 1, we're up to chapter 150, page Reish Tzadik Gimel, 293. So to put things into context here, the Hemshech, obviously, as the name implies, is one flowing series of ideas that moves on from plot to subplot to subplot, etc. And the central theme is one word: is interface. The Rebbe Rashab is dissecting in detail the interface between existence and the divine, and that which is beyond. And for an interface to work properly, every switch and every connection has to be perfect, as we just witnessed with the audio problem. And as such, he lays out, you could say the first section of the Hemshech, which began Shavuos 1912 or Tafresh Ayin Beis, and ran till Vayigash Ayin Gimel, 31 discourses. He laid out the cosmic map, which briefly is two types of energy. One is, we'll call it in English, simple English, finite energy, and others infinite energy. Or you can say immanent energy and transcendent energy. In language of Chassidus, one is Pnimi, Makif. Or you could say the Esespheres and Keser. In other words, Ratzon, the desire, and the faculties. All these are similar in the sense that there's two types of energy in our lives and all of existence. One that is immanent and present, call it energies inside containers, Eris and Kalim. An example for that would be all our faculties, all human faculties. If there were no energies residing and tailored to and in a seamless way flowing into the containers, and vice versa, the containers being completely commensurate and tailored to the energy, we wouldn't have a functioning structure. Example being, let's take the vision in the eye, the hearing in the ears, the seichel, intelligence in the brain. So the human body and the total of nature, you can say, is a perfect example of a eris pnimim. And then there's Makif. Makif is a transcendent energy that is beyond existence, that in a sense a desire for existence. In our case, in the human being, it's also our desire for anything. Whether it's a desire to walk, or a desire to talk, or a desire to write, or to eat. The desire does not manifest in any particular area. It's more of an overriding, transcendent force. And these are the two forces that really work in every area of existence and life. And from a divine perspective, it's a God's divine desire for existence, which already creates a relationship. The first relationship is that something desires something. If there's no desire, there's no connection. And then the second is that God manifests godliness in existence in an immanent fashion. That every aspect of existence has this particular energy that fits and tailored to its particular needs. And the challenge, of course, is how these two energies meet. That's the big question. This is the central theme of Ayin Beis, the meeting of these two. In Aveda, you can say mitzvahs is more connected to Ratzon, and Torah, learning Torah, is connected more to Chochmah and to internalizing. And you need both. Internalizing something is on the end of the interface, means that it's on our terms. On the other hand, to have a connection, an interface, an intermediary needs to speak both languages. To speak the language of the divine, so Ein Sof, the one that is the transcendent energy, is far more revealed divinity, whereas the immanent energy is far more manifest within existence. So though they're both divine, but you have here both aspects working, and when they communicate with each other and connect, you have a perfect flow. Now the details of each of these steps, obviously I'm not going to summarize, because that's all these Maimarim, and the Rebbe Rashab wouldn't need to write all this if it could just be summarized in 5 minutes. But the details of it goes to level by level by level of how that happens, how these connections are made. And they're made on many, many levels in many different ways. One of the key things that Ayin Beis establishes is that even the Pnimi, even the immanent energy, is not just the structure of existence and its definition and its parameters is not just from the perspective of the containers, but it's also from the perspective of energy. Even divine energy also has in it Esespheres, which is one opinion in Kabbalistic writings and another Mamorim, but Ayin Beis follows that opinion because that's critical to the interface, that even energy also has Chochmah, Bina, and the Tzir, so-called the image, and the definitions of existence within it, in a very subtle form, which doesn't take hold until the energy meets the container, but nevertheless is there. What it's called, all the way in its root, it's called the 10 hidden spheres. That's the sphere Sagnuzis, which, as he puts it, that the infinite, in this transcendent energy envisioned and allocated and estimated, Shir Atzmei B'Koyach is the expression, what it would take to create a structured existence. The example we've been using here throughout has been like, think of an artist that can create infinite possibilities of art, and that artist then envisions, I want, among all those infinite possibilities, to find one manifestation of it. And that's called the 10 hidden spheres before the Tzimtzum, which ultimately become the root of the structure of existence. Obviously, at that point it's completely amorphous, completely within the divine infinite energy, so you can't even distinguish it in any way. So there's a necessity of a Tzimtzum that conceals it, and then a whole process of diminishments and tzimtzumim that allow that energy to become finally manifest in Atzilus. We would say Atzilus is the perfect world, because what you have there is a total alignment between the structure of existence with the divine intention. Once you leave Atzilus, meaning go in lower levels, that energy is more and more concealed, and thus becomes the more independent ego and reality, to the point where it becomes in this physical plane one that energy within is almost completely concealed. And all we have are the shells, the outer containers, and a lack of awareness or consciousness of all these deeper forces within. And the challenge, of course, is how do we climb that ladder? And essentially, as he established in the first section, that there's 3 definitions in the word Keser, or you could say 3 levels, 3 dimensions. One is a Keser, even in the transcendent energy, that's closer to the immanent energy. It's already speaking its language. It's that infinite possibilities, estimating what the finite structure would look like. Then you have Keser, which is a step removed from that. It's the desire without structure. And then there's the deepest level in Keser and desire that's beyond both. So you have 3 key steps in the whole interface process. The same is also true from the perspective of the immanent energy. It also has 3 levels. It has how it's manifest in Atzilus, Eris, and Kelim. It has how it's more and less Keli. And then it has where it's complete and no Keli. And all these are all, as I said, steps in how you connect the two. The second section of Ayin Beis, which we're now in, and we're now in the middle of, we're up to Discourse 38. So 7 Mamorim now into the second section. I believe it's 38, right? Just make sure. Yeah. Here he begins to connect it now to, I guess you can say, he begins to ground it in context of history. So the difference between the work of the Avos, patriarchs, basically all the work pre-Matan Torah, pre-Sinai, and Sinai are reflective of these 2 dimensions. Where pre-Sinai the main work was to connect existence with its source in the immanent. In other words, like the Pasuk says that Va'eru el Avos el Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Bekel Shaddai. Shaddai. What's Shaddai? He gives all different explanations, but Shaddai is also the 3 interpretations of Shaddai, beginning with that is defined energy. She'omer le'lamedai. God is basically limiting in the flow of his energy to fit into existence. Then he gives higher interpretations of Shaddai. Shaddai from the word Dai Machsere. That's the highest. But then before that, there's Shaddai from the word Ad Bli Dai. Right, vacation Ad Bli Dai. But it's still all in the world of finite and immanent energy. Basically, the Avos prepared the ground by expanding the containers of existence as much as humanly possible from below, that it should be fitting to have the divine energy within it, essentially back to the way it was before Chet Eitzadas, before the tree of knowledge. Preparing the ground for Matan Torah, which we haven't yet come to in this discussion, that will be a chiddush, there will be a whole new energy that will enter that is beyond the structure of existence. But as we've been learning, even the divine in the structure of existence is quite an achievement, so it shouldn't be minimized. So we're in the middle of that discussion now. And in discussing those 2, the Avos himself, the Rebbe Rashab translated into somewhat Kabbalistic terms, but on a more microcosmic level, it's the difference basically between Meichen and Midas. Midas is how one relates to another. Meichen, in its purest form, is how one relates to themselves. Intelligence, by definition, is communicating with others can be a distraction. True intelligence is being drawn inward. Midas is only possible when you work with others. So the same thing as in Atzilus, you have Meichen and Midas. The Midas of Atzilus are primarily to begin to bring the energy to the next level, to Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah. The Meichen of Atzilus is, as he said, is ultimate Meichen Be'etzem, is how it is for itself, where it relates much more to the Ein Sof, to the levels that are higher than Atzilus. So, where do the Avos exactly fit into this? So he basically broke it down into 4 levels. He said like this: there's what he called Yaakov, Yisrael Zuta, Yisrael Saba, the Tfuna, and Meichen Abba Ve'ime line, which is Meichen Be'etzem. Yaakov is essentially just the pure application. Pure application. The example he gives for is the example when you look at Shulchan Aruch, you see this is the halacha, this is the law. You have a little reason for it, so there's a little intelligence there, but it's basically this is the application, this is what you have to do. Where in human development, that's the stage of essential an immature intelligence stage, immature as in the earliest stages of development, where you have primarily driven by action with minimal intelligence necessary for that action. Then comes Yisrael Zuta, which means the small Yisrael. Yisrael Zuta is the level of Midas as they're already developing, maturing, based on a more and more mature intelligence. But they're still in the world of application and Midas. Then comes Yisrael Saba Tfuna, what he calls here Meichen, Midas Sheba Meichen. That's how, now we're no longer in the domain of application. You're now talking about the domain of the mind as it is on its own, but it's a mind that's already thinking of application. So it's how, how a Rav, like he says, like someone is learning and already beginning to have inclinations to Chesed and Gvura, but it's all intellectual at this point. It's not an actual ruling yet. So it's primarily Meichen, but it's Meichen as it relates to Midas. That's the Avos. That's where the Avos reside, in that area. Which is basically, in other words, it's a divine energy, but it's relating already to application to the world of Biyah and to Midas, to the world outside of it, to a Dover Nivdal, as he puts it, separate. And then there's Meichen Be'etzem. Abba Ve'ime line, he calls it, as opposed to Abba Ve'ime Tatan, as opposed to a lower Chachma Bina, which is more how it relates to application. Here's Chachma Bina as it is in its purest form. No application at all. It's purely absorbed by an idea, without any practical application necessarily. You're so absorbed, you're not even thinking about application. And this is Meichen Be'etzem, the purest form of Meichen, which as he hasn't spelled it out in detail yet, but this is what Matan Torah introduces. Obviously, when Mashiach comes, that will be the fullest sense of it, which is what's consistent with what you've learned in Sichos, where you speak about Al Totzer Esmeyev, that today we have we conquered the 7 nations, 7 Midas, but Meichen alone will come then. Keini Knizi V'Kadmeni. The similar idea, because that's already a level of divine that is not directly related to existence. It's related, but much more removed. So in the context of what we're talking, in a microcosm, that's like Eir HaBlikvul compared to the Midas. It's still Eir HaGvul, so let me clarify that. It's in the world of Atzilus. We're not talking about Keser. But in Atzilus itself, it's speaking the language. Intelligence, as I've discussed here at length, intelligence, the mind allows you to imagine, and you can travel to a place that is beyond structure. So it's really the key to the interface between the defined structure and that which is beyond the defined structure. Chachma, essentially, its bittul is a keli, a container for the bittul of Keser. Like he says in Tanya, in Perek Lamed Hey, he says that Chachma is the keli for Hulavadev Ein Zelase. The sense of awe that a person has when they conceive of an idea, it's not about them yet. That is the purest form of intelligence, which allows you to be a container to something. You can think about something that's beyond yourself. Children can't, animals cannot, but a mature human being, is able to conceive of something that's beyond your self-interest, to put it blunter. And as soon as you can think of something beyond self-interest, that's the opening to draw in something that's not just you. Which is, of course, the big trap, is the ego and the self. And the Midas are completely about self. Like he says, Midas is about Hargosh Atzmi, how I feel about it. That's the whole meaning of a Midah. I like it, I don't like it. I'm attracted or I'm not attracted. Seichel does not speak the language I like or I don't like. Seichel is detached from that. Seichel, in its objective form, as he said in the last chapter, which I'm going to sum up now, Seichel is basically, its role is simply objective analysis, reflection. It doesn't speak about, it doesn't get excited in an emotional way, and it's objective where it does not think in terms, is it good for me or not good for me, as he calls hashgoshas atzmei. It's not about feeling yourself or not feeling yourself. So Seichel is obviously a critical, Chabad is essentially the key to the interface from existence to that which is beyond. But the interesting thing with Chabad is it is in the structure. Intelligence is not makiv. It's not keseh. It's not something beyond. It's in the world of intelligence, so it has an element that it can understand the world and relates to the structure of existence, but it also can understand that which is beyond the structure itself. So in Seichel itself, he spoke in the last Maimer, we learned at length, he spoke about Daimim Tzemeach Chai Medaber, that in intelligence itself you have 4 dimensions. You have the Daimim in Seichel. That again is pure application. Daimim in Seichel, as he said, was for example, the wisdom, the intelligence needed in technique, and how to move your fingers, and how to draw, but the technique. He said, Tzemeach in Seichel is really innovation, Hamtzah. What are you going to draw? What are you going to write? What the wisdom inside, but beyond the technique itself. No, it's not the training of the training of a person's body to fulfill a certain objective, but the Hamtzah within it. The Chai Sheb Seichel, which is also Chai Sheb Medaber, basically. They're saying Medaber and Seichel are synonymous. What's the Chai? The Chai says the wisdom in composing words, which is a whole other level of wisdom, is the wisdom of develops, it calls that Moichen Diyanika, where a child comes to the stage where they suddenly are able to speak. Even though they had intelligence before, they understood before, they had the mouth was there, they had all the ability, the tools to speak. They even have Isis in the Nefesh, and still they cannot speak because Moichen, the Katnus, has to enter. It's a stage of development that is a wisdom that enters, that allows a person to actually compose words. And then there's finally Moichen Be'etzem, which is Medaber. Seichel Be'etzem, he said, is a Seichel that's detached from any application. He says, especially that Seichel Aliki, because everything else, actually, he fits science into category number 2, by the way. Tzemeach in Seichel. Because science is understanding, but understanding nature. And he says the 4th level, this highest level, is understanding that which is beyond nature. Or as he puts it, before nature. To appreciate something outside of existence, essentially. That's Seichel Be'etzem. And this is how he explains, this is the difference between Atzilus, as it's for the purpose of Atzilus. Atzilus transmits all energy. There's a dimension that Atzilus transmits only for Atzilus purpose. That's like the Medaber Sheb Seichel. That's the Seichel Sheb Medaber, rather, the highest level. It includes also a lower level within it, like he spoke about Shlomo Melech. King Solomon also had that wisdom of Atzilus to build the Beis HaMikdash, but not like Betzalel, on the other hand, is also composes words. That's already the Seichel of, we said, the Seichel of Chai. And then how Atzilus transmits into Biyah, that's already how Atzilus is speaking to Daim Tzemeach Chai, which is lower than the pure core, what he calls Etzem HaMechen. Now, this he explained also the difference between Asius and Cyrus. When you speak through letters, through words, you're communicating an idea. Through Cyrus, it's a very diminished flow. Cyrus is far more connected to Tzemeach and Daimim, and the words are much more connected to Chai and to Medab. Now, this moment that we're up to now, the last chapter, he said, Lahavim b'teisrus bir, to understand with additional explanation how the Hamshach of Esesris Atzilus Gufa is a Tzedek Biyah, and how it is not Atzilus. So he gave, because here the question is, what does that mean? That Atzilus is transmitting an energy that's so-called not commensurate with Atzilus' personality. So he gives an example to understand it. He says there's 2 types of cause and effect. We're still looking for the scientific term, but one cause and effect is where cause and effect are the same personality. Example, a tree and its branches. The branches of a tree are an effect of the tree, are a result of the tree, but they're the same personality. So that's a very close cause and effect. That's obviously Atzilus for Atzilus. So everything within Atzilus energy is similar, like the branches of a tree. It's similar to Atzilus. Now, there's also a cause and effect that's not similar. That the personality of the effect is different than the personality of the cause. Even though this is its cause, and it's encompassed in the cause, and it flows from it. Nevertheless, what comes out, what emerges, is not like a branch from a tree. What emerges is a different personality. And the example of that is Midas from Meichen. Midas emerge from intelligence. We're talking about now not the natural, innate feelings a person has. We're talking about the Midas, feelings that are born out of contemplation. They come out of the contemplation, but they have a different personality, as I mentioned before. Midas are, number one, subjective. What's hergesh and feeling? What's in it for me? My self-interest. Even Midas of Kedusha. It's about my feeling. I feel something. I attracted, not attracted. Number two, Midas are excitable. They're hispilus. They have excitement there. Meichen on both fronts are completely different. Meichen are objective. They don't think what's in it for me. Meichen thinks of the subject for itself. And the secondly Meichen has is that it's not excitable. It doesn't have excitement. It has hispilus Meichen, but it's an intelligent hispilus. But fundamentally, it's not about sensing oneself. The whole thing of Meichen, I'm reading the end of the chapter, is they're not shaykh the hargasha feeling. On the contrary, the whole idea of Meichen is bittul, is suspending yourself and putting yourself aside. The opposite of Midas, which is about not the self. As he said before, hargasha tzatzmei. Okay. Well, that's Meichen. And then the second thing is also that doesn't have any hispilus. It will confuse, it will distract them from thinking. So that's where we're up to. So now we'll learn Kufnun after this summary. I hope the summary was helpful to bring it all together. You have a summary now of 292 pages. There was a parenthesis that we didn't really fully analyze, but you know what, I'll do that, it's a little later. Let me just continue here now. Okay? So, Kufnun, page 293, chapter 150. V'yuven zeh b'avedus Hashem. Now he's going to explain the difference between... Okay, so let me just sum up. So there are two types of Ilah v'Alul. One of the same personality, one not of the same personality. And though he doesn't spell it out yet, I'm sure he will, clearly the one is Atzilus for Atzilus, that's of the same personality. And Hara Nivdelis means how Atzilus is informing the next level. That would be how Meichen speaks to Midas. And he actually said that the main... What did he say? There's an interesting expression he said... By the way, Zarzid is a starling. It's a small bird that also can be taught to speak. He's mentioned a Zarzid and a papagai. So Zarzid is in Hebrew a starling. I looked it up. Yeah, but I wanted to say. Okay, he compared also the same idea. You see, essentially, it's about whether the flow, whether the energy, whether the transmission is closer to you or closer to that which is outside of you. And Atzilus is more internal. It's like the internal. It's like the Beis Hamikdash in a way, and then there's how it transmits energy outside of it, which is already, which is outside, which is already not the same level of Atzilus, but it's still caused and affected by Atzilus. That's what this chapter adds. Ha'il v'ol na'arin nevdelos. And by the way, the example that I gave child it was an example similar that he gave earlier. A child in his mother's womb is similar to the second Ilah v'Ol, where it results from his parents, but it's a different entity, it's a different personality.
And with the fruit, what did you say? The fruit,
fruit also was an example. He doesn't use that example, but you could say a fruit also. Yeah, as opposed to a branch. Because look at the fruit, you don't see any.
You don't see branch.
Yeah. So now he's going to explain this in Avedus Hashem. V'yuven zeh by Vedas Hashem. I will understand this now. Vedas Hashem. These two different types of levels. Shadei Hisbonenus Aliki. Through a divine contemplation. Does everyone know what that means? Hisbonenus Aliki. We use it so much that nobody even can translate it. What's Hisbonenus Aliki? You ever think of that? Or you just take it for granted? Well, I'll tell you what it's not. Hisbonenus Aliki is what we never do, basically. Everything we think about is about life and our existence. Hisbonenus Aliki means a person who sits down and is just going to contemplate one thing and one thing only. What is God like? We don't usually do that well. We talk about it, but Hisbonenus Aliki means more than 30 seconds also.
Do it every morning.
Okay, officially we're supposed to do it every morning for hours. You do?
This is Meichen.
Oh, that's what you mean. Huh?
This is Meichen.
Hisbonenus is a contemplation. Hisbonenus means, look, it could be embarrassing actually. That's why I bring it up, because we take it, everyone has Hisbonenus Aliki, we just move ahead. We move on, let's go further. Hisbonenus Aliki, you have to really, the best way to do this in a personal, relevant way is by looking at, if you were to document, if you could document even, all the thoughts you will have today, as they come. Push it, like you keep writing notes. Imagine writing every thought comes your way, including machshavas zaros. Every thought, and look at the end of the day what the list will be. A God will probably be very, very few among the thoughts. Very infrequent, right? Except, of course, if you need Him for something and saying, "Oh God, I need a parnosa today." I'm not talking about that type of things.
That is Hisbonenus Aliki.
And not mamish, but I'm saying it at best. I'm not saying to be critical. The reason is because we are material human beings that think about material things. As simple as that. I mean, learning Chassidus right now, we're supposed to be thinking not about. That's exactly what Chassidus is meant to really be. That's why I'm pointing it out. But the best way to look at it is to say, okay, how much have I thought about God today? And the answer is not much, because life takes over. I'm not saying this to be critical, just who we are. It's in nature. You think about, what am I going to eat? I'm hungry. I have to go shopping. I have business to do. I have work to do. I have clients. I have this, I have that, I have that. Then you have all the other agmas nefesh, not agmas nefesh, whatever it may be. Everybody's got their list. Even if life is going well. That's what we think about survival primarily, and that which is related around it. That's how Hashem made it. Parnasa, of course, is a major issue for most people, and so on. Then we have children, we have family, and all the means and this. You got to go shopping. Then how are you going to drive there? So just go into a gas station. I'm just giving an example of almost all the menial, mundane things we're just involved in. I mean, it's sad, but that's how it is. Hisbonenus Aliki is a person who simply dedicates time to think about, not about anything that's connected to existence, essentially.
Would be included, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah. Or the preparation to davening.
Or the way davening should be.
Davening is already actually a moding with God. But let's begin with davening is an art that altogether we don't even know how to do. Hisbonenus, at least we know, we contemplate on many things. You can contemplate on a mathematical equation. So you can contemplate lahavdil on a divine thought. You don't know Chassidus. Without Chassidus, what are you going to contemplate on? So Chassidus gives you a whole picture to think here. Let's think about it. What does an existence look like that's beyond time and space? So just mentioning that already, for most people, said, hey, 1 second, that's already too much for me. But that means Hisbonenus Aliki. Now, there are many levels of Hisbonenus Aliki, obviously. There's, like we learned earlier, there's also a likus, like I'm healthy, and thank God that He's given me the power. My heart is beating, I'm breathing, I'm walking around, and other people. And that's also, that he says earlier, that is a likus also, but that's a likus completely as it's your needs. So it's a very, call it immature level of divine contemplation. But it's still higher than just thinking about you and being completely self-absorbed. So the question is, where do we go with this? So as I said, we're not trained to think like this. That's why I'm elaborating on it. In yeshiva, it's words. Hisbonenus Aliki. That's why as soon as I saw it, I said to myself, I'm not just going to jump. Because every time I've ever learned this, any time when I was in yeshiva as a kid, you just jumped. It was like a given that everyone understands what it is. When nobody knows what do you mean? Tell us what it is. But these have become words. They're just words. Like most of Tanya is just words. So instead it's holy words, and a lot of it has very rich meaning, and some of it we get. But the personalized is a whole other story. And personalizing simply, that's what I'm saying. First we have to acknowledge how often do we do it, don't we do it. If we, let's say, do it with our children, once in the morning, once at night, and say, let's talk a little about God. Your neshama just came back. Where was this neshama? Where did it come back from? That's already getting outside of existence, because a neshama is not physical. Neshama is something godly. Where did it go? Was it travel? What does it even mean that it went and came? It's not physical. So, at the end of Shema, this is what we're supposed to be doing, obviously, when we're davening. And any time we're being mizbeinen. Now, there were chassidim that sat for 5, 6 hours, 7 hours, that thought only about a lukus. Not easy to do. Especially without distractions. So what's expected of us is at least to try the best we can, and then you work at it. Start 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Everything you work with is a refining process. And every time you think about God, not about yourself or existence, it always is a refining process. It's always refreshing, so to speak. And I keep quoting your line that you sent me from Nachman, whatever. He says, I prefer a God I don't understand than one that thinks like me. Because we know how we think. Unless some people are really arrogant and they think that they're the best thinkers, so they'd love to have a God that thinks like them. That's all right. I'm not getting to that level of self whatever distortion. But so Hizbonus Elokei simply means applying yourself with your mind deliberately. It's not going to happen by accident. By accident, you rely on your default thoughts. It's not going to be godly. You have to deliberately say, I'm going to learn something. I'm going to think about something. What we're doing right now, actually. Like I said before, there's Lifnei HaTeva, there's Alpi Teva. Science is brilliant, but it's about understanding nature. It's understanding existence at its best. And to understand outside of existence means you have to think about what put it here, or what was before that first ball of gas, etc., etc. Which immediately means you're not thinking about existence and yourself anymore. Called the Lifnei HaTeva. What was the Lifnei HaTeva or B'tei HaTeva? What was the expression there? It was a very interesting expression that I think is... I know, Lifnei HaTeva for sure, but there was also... Remember where it is? It's in chapter Kuf Mem Zayin. No, chapter Kuf Mem Vov. Chochmas HaTeva, and then later he talks about the final one. Where is the Medaber here? I just want to see the Ace is there. Lifnei HaTeva, not Teva itself. Yeah. It's very interesting. It didn't say Lamayla not Teva. It says Lifnei HaTeva. Lifnei. Okay, right. So now we're talking about Hizbonus Elokei.
Yes.
Hizbonus Elokei, as I said, the best way to identify is by process of elimination. It's not what we usually think about. So we sit here and we learn and we talk about this. This is what Chassidus is about. That's why we learn Chassidus before davening. It's meant to be to put your mind in a place. How could you speak to God if you don't think about Him? And if it's not going to be lip service or just mundane prayer, which is give me what I need and goodbye. So
why is it that with Chassidus we have to truly do that in Hizbonus Elokei, Chassidus is the main source for being able to accomplish that? How come it seems to be that even though we have the goods, so to speak, to do that and material, the other groups, like Litvisha and other traditions, have much more of emphasis on learning Kollel, learning the whole life, whereas Chassidus has always emphasized, doing your Parnasa, working. What you would think that since we have what we could do, truly Hizbonus Elokei for a lifetime, you would think that there'd be a much bigger emphasis if it's that critical in as far as our day-to-day life, as far as time-wise, rather than versus.
And
I'm just thinking that we don't have a tradition of Kollel for a lifetime, 40 like they have in Mir or Panovich or other groups that learn for 20 years. But yet we have really what to do. We really have what we could. We got the riches, so to speak, but it seems like it's
a completely unrelated question, what you're asking me, to what we're discussing here.
We're in Kollel now.
I know, but he's just saying that we're.
First of all, who since when is being a Kollel some virtue?
No,
Where does it say that?
You're talking about his.
No, I'm saying. No, I know what I'm saying, but I'm saying you just made a statement that like being a kohen all your life is like some type of virtue.
But you would be able to do this all
who says that's the kavanah to do this all day?
Okay.
There's basic knesses lebeis hamedrash and beis hamedrash lahanig behem min derech eretz. Harbe also Rab Shimon v'lei also biyadam. Teirasim Nosei, to learn all day is not the work for most people. It's not the Veda. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya, this is a long discussion of generational discussion. There was a time, 40 years in the wilderness, the Jews all they did was learn all day. But then they came, that's why the Meraglim didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. And that was considered what? A great sin. Why? They wanted to stay in Kail. They were surrounded by the clouds. Because the Kavanah is dir b'tachtenim, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, if you want to stay in Kail, that's not the words he's using, then the best Kail is Gan Eden, where the Neshamas don't have bodies altogether. And yet, like he says in Tanya Pei Klamazeh, he says even the greatest tzaddik when he comes down here, his Ava V'yira here, can never be as high as it is unencumbered by the physical. Even the greatest tzaddik Gomer. There has to be a Yirid. So that's number one, is why are we here? That understanding of the purpose of existence is very different up Chassidus than many others, because they think that we're here only to be like so-called, it's only to prepare a reward for the world to come. Whereas in this Avid, this doesn't take away from the mile of Torah. The Rebbe most of the day learned Torah. With all the what's the word? Activities, all the activism, and so on. The Rebbe learned Torah all day. And we want the Baruch Hu to learn Torah all day, So it's a longer discussion. Whether people live up to the standards, that's another story. So my question is far more simple than yours. I wouldn't compare it to Litvaks. I would compare it to ourselves. Do we have his bonus aliki altogether? Forget about all day. You're jumping to all day. Now, I never met anyone in the Litvish world that has his bonus aliki all day. They don't think about God. They think about what they learn. I'm not taking away. And there's a big problem, because what do they do with the Yetzer Hara while that happens? And when you don't have godliness and only have Torah, you could also ultimately forsake Torah, as the Gemara says. But I'm not going to go into discussion. Right now, I just want to establish what is bonus aliki is. Let's start small. Okay. Let's start 5 minutes a day before we get into the Kail environment. You can show me a few chassidim, those chassidim that could be mizbayin alakus all day. By all means, I wish there were a few. Maybe there are. There's always a few somewhere. And there were people, I remember in the 70s, there were Elter Chassidim, some Chassidim, that davened all day and learned all day. I saw Rav Rama Yar, I saw Mr. Nemanov, how many hours a day did he daven? It wasn't just davening, they learned Chassidus and the davening, it was a whole thing. These are people by names that people saw. I saw some of them here. Well, there's someone. Anyway, the point, is bonus of the key is contemplating God. So you say now. So baved Hashem is bonus of the key when you apply your mind deliberately, intentionally to godliness. Which again, this line can so easily be jumped over. I don't want to jump it at all. This line alone you can learn the rest of your life. That you come to awakening an arousal of love and awe. Now, when did that happen last? Many of us have an awe of God, but I would say it's more of a fear, because we see God striking people. We don't want to be struck. We make deals. Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, suddenly people are making new deals. I'll do this if you do this. Everyone's got their superstitions, and then we have love. I guess there's some element of love. For many of us, when we bring up our children or we ourselves are committed to Yiddishkeit, for us we see that as a form of why would we do it if we don't have a love and awe of God. But the argument could be made, it has nothing to do with love and awe, it could be mechanical, called mitzvah sanashim ulamad, that we're trained to do it, we just do it by habit. And again, I'm not here to, God forbid, criticize anybody. I'm in the same boat as you guys are. It's just that it's important to think about it. When the Rebbe Rashab says it, what does he mean? He means that just like a deliberate contemplation will also bring something that's not going to come if you don't deliberately contemplate. In other words, the Ava V'yir that we're accustomed to is not coming from his bonus. That's coming, from time to time. We have a conscience, we feel guilty, we did something wrong. We all have our moments of Seirush Tshuva. That's not what he's talking about here. Here he's talking very specifically, a person sits down and is mizbainen, and when he thinks about God a little more and concentrates, it will awaken something inside of him. Some type of, at least attraction to it. Now again, this is not so common. I mean, I'm not going to compare notes here, but how often does that happen to us? That we actually sit down, we think about it. And not many of us love Chassidus. You learn Chassidus is very geschmack and very spiritually gratifying. It's very, not just logical, it's transcendental in many ways. So yes, that is in a way, when you start liking that itself, you could say you're starting to like something that's more than just food and drink and gashmis. It's a certain ava of ruchnis, you could say. So that could probably go into ava v'yira. Probably more ava than yira, because when you like something, you know that's ava. Yira is already more of realizing how distant or how beyond God is, so you have a certain deeper respect. The Rebbe Rashab says somewhere in Torah Shalom, he says, why do we talk about all these deep inyanim? Because you know who you're dealing with, you have a different type of derech eretz. So sometimes you don't necessarily understand all this, but the mere fact that you see, wow, this is like really beyond, you realize that God is not just another, he's not our peer, essentially. But again, this I'm trying to just simply read the line in a way that we apply it. And, what does it mean to have his bonus and to apply it to Ava V'yir? So now he's continuing. Because that's the tachlis hakavana. Not just his bonus to remain by the contemplation, but to actually bring it to an awakening in your heart that you actually feel something. Why is that the purpose? So he's giving you the reason now. Why? Why do we need that? Yes, it's true. There's a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah l'man asher tiras Hashem alekecha. But why? What's the reason? Is there a reason? So he says yes, because through that, through affecting your feelings, that's the refinement and the birur, the refinement and the cleansing of the chumrius, of the crassness of the animal soul. The tikkun kol ha'inyanim, and the repair of all the things in a person's life. Before I read on, let me explain why is that the case. Because as I said earlier, what do we contemplate most of the time? We contemplate material things. What's our Ava V'yira mostly to? Physical things. I want money. I don't want this. I want this food. I don't want that food. We have our desires. We have our pleasures, our delights, our likings and our dislikings on all levels. This person likes this rav, this one doesn't like this rav. That type of thing. So when you are able to take your same heart that likes or dislikes gashmisdik things and say, okay, now I'm going to like and respect something that is godly, what do you think is happening? It's taking that heart. It can only be controlled by your nefesh elokis and nefesh havam. Two things can't control it at once. And instead of focusing on something that is a physical desire, even if it's mutter, even if it's permissible, you're focusing on a godly interest. That right there, that's a refinement. Simple as that. If it remained only in your contemplation, then it would be philosophical, academic, and wouldn't have really affected the main place where your nefesh habamis resides, in your desires, in your likes and dislikes. So it's simply, that's what he's saying. So it's pashat zichuch ubira chumis nefesh v'tikun kol ha'inyanim. And also another thing that it accomplishes, the Ava V'yira, through this, hukiyim hamitzvus kedeboy lemahave lemeva kedeboy lemeva. This, in addition to the zichuch, which in a say you could say is almost like the refinement of the animal, there's also something very positive. It makes your mitzvahs to be kedeboy lemeva means how do you say? It's complete functionality. In avoiding evil and doing good, like it says elsewhere at length. When he says ba'erech means ba'erech, doesn't always say at length. So that's what his bonus that brings to feelings. Ava V'yira accomplished. Number one, it refines the nefesh habamis and kol ha'inyanim. Tikkun kol ha'inyanim, I'm assuming, means basically repair of all our behavioral and issues and stuff like that. And the second thing, make sure your mitzvahs are kedeboy, because if you don't have Ava V'yira, you're doing mitzvahs, as I said, how? either mechanical, like an automatic pilot, blindly, or for some ulterior motive, and doesn't really have, it's not complete, it's being done because of some reason. This Avira, when you have Avira, then it's a whole different story. If you remember, he discussed earlier, there were two ways. You do mitzvahs, and you have in them, also you do mitzvahs because God is helping you, so you respect Him because He's giving you life. Then we said there's the way of doing mitzvahs where you respect God even more. It's more godly, but then there's a whole different world where it starts with midas. You have avos Hashem, and therefore you do mitzvahs. That was, if you remember, that was the meichen sheba midas. Then that's midas sheba meichen. Where was that? I think it's very similar to what he's saying here now. I think the end of a chapter with Aveda and Aveda. It was the last Maimer, I'm not sure. Yeah. The end of chapter 147. The middle half of 147. Remember, he spoke to the four dagas and that's Cham and Aveda. Evet Poshet. What was the first one? Then the Bedakas. Sameach Yesrik Ksas Chayes. He has some life in it. Like the Melech, because the Melech he has Simcha because he's telling him to do it. Ach Mekayman Be'emes Hu Ha'ev. Yeah. Avir bizgal salav abayim v'zeh b'chin schayz b'chin schayz amda be'aved b'chin schayz b'chin schayz avir. Yeah. I think it's very connected to what he's saying here, but we'll soon see. Maybe not. And this is the entire purpose of a human being be'elam in this world. Because of this, his neshama came down below. I think he's answering your question, Rabbi Lezer. The whole reason that neshama came down to a body, like it says, like it says elsewhere. This is the purpose. The purpose is what? Is to refine, misaken, and that the mitzvah should be because the boy lemevet. Yeah. But Ava v'yira hu sheyi is bonus dafka, and that this love and awe or love and respect should be specifically through his bonus, through a deliberate his bonus. The mitchilat tzarich lisa his bonus being yisav. Now he's going to explain what these bonus and the stages. The beginning, and remember, he's going through all the levels we've discussed in Aveda. So this grounds everything we've learned. It's not just Atzilus and Biyah and Haskalah. He's talking about Aveda. The mitchilat tzarich lisa his bonus being yisav is yeshma'ayin b'chlal l'sa'inyan. Beginning, the contemplation should be in what? In the service yashmai, in the fact that existence came from not nothing, but did not create itself. Yashma'ayin came from a thing that's completely different than itself. I specifically say not, because yashma'ayin is often translated something from nothing. Look, it's not nothing. God is not nothing. The reason we call God nothing is because the God compared to us beyond us. So it's really wanting to say that existence is coming from a place that's completely beyond us. And to be mizbayin b'chlol ha'inyan in the general inyan, ech shekol davar yesh nesava ma'ayin elikim ma'aves. The contemplation, now everything that's a yesh could not have made itself, and was put there from the ayin eliki, which is, in other words, a completely antithetical reality called the ayin eliki, a divine ayin. Because if elikus is also yesh, in other words, proportionate to the yesh of the existence, so then, okay, that's like a father having birth to a child. So the child is contemplating he has a father has a father, then it's still in the same league. His abundance is not going to lead you anywhere. It's just going to make you more of you. It just doesn't give existence any deeper understanding of itself. It's more of understanding how it's like I mentioned with the chelam, one train, one car moves the next car. but who moved the first car? That type of thing. So now it says bonus in his yesh, that every yesh in the Sava from Ailiki that Mahava Ese, that brought it into being. In effect, it really means that we are here by design, with purpose, and we did not exist earlier in a different stage. It's a real new entity. So what's the bonus here? There has to be some type of intelligent contemplation. What's the contemplation? What are we thinking about? So he's going to explain. How do we know this? How does your mind? We're not talking about faith now. We're not talking about faith that you believe God created the world. We're talking about how do you come through a contemplation, sitting and contemplating to understand that an ayin created a yesh. He says, "Zeh move my yesh atzme." This is understood from the yesh itself by observing existence of this world. You can come to this. The kasher anuroyim mitzias yesh, because when we see the existence of a yesh, yesh here means not ego, so yesh means just a existence of substance. Anuroyim. Behechlech lemer, we have to say shnesava ma'ayin. We have to say that it came from a state of ayin. Kiyev shalemer yesh miyesh ad bli tachlis. This is the first logical proof. Because you can't say yesh miyesh ad bli tachlis. You can't say something came from something with no end. Why not? Why can't you? Because there's a rule in mathematics even. Gvulim can never lead to bli gvul. Numbers. There's no such thing as reaching the infinite. The infinite set of numbers remains always equally distant from the trillion of trillion, whatever, to the highest power.
As we see Beluchos in Washington, keeps going on.
Right. That's why we have no problem. It's never going to become infinite. So.
I have a client.
No, that's this is bonus aliki till 10. That's good. So what do you have here is like this, that if you think about it, the finite world cannot have been here infinite time, because yesh miyesh cannot go infinitely, because if this is one, this is one, this is one, at some point there has to be a beginning.
Why? We always speak in mathematical terms of infinite set of numbers.
I just said infinite set of numbers, but the singles, but the finite set never reaches the infinite set. As much as finite you can build, it never will go forever.
We utilize that concept all the time in mathematics.
As you just said it, the infinite set of numbers is not the finite. So I'm talking about the finite world now. Finite objects.
Finite numbers, 1, 2, 3.
Will never add to infinite. There's no such thing. There's no equation like that.
Asymptotic to infinity. We use it all the time in mathematics.
Are we talking to each other?
I don't understand it.
You're not even hearing what I just said. For the third time.
He's processing it, not absorbing.
I'm not going to repeat it again because it's not getting anywhere. Okay. You're set with your infinite set of numbers. Finite never adds up to infinite. On the contrary, finite set of numbers can never become infinite. So what are you saying?
If it's a finite set, it cannot be an infinite set. No,
we're talking about infinite set.
I didn't say. I'm talking about the finite set now.
Finite.
That's a finite. You can
have finite numbers
in an infinite set.
No. Who said that? No, it's not correct. What you just said is mathematically incorrect. That's why there's an infinite set of numbers that have nothing to do with the finite set of numbers. A finite set of numbers do not add up to infinite, no matter what happens. It's too different. Infinite set of numbers, you study some mathematics.
Yes, sure.
Infinite set of numbers is a hypothetical, imaginary figure to make calculations. It's not because the finite is informed by it. Tell me, give me the equation what adds up to infinite. I can tell you, a million is two half millions add up to a million. How many millions add up to infinite? There's no such equation. No one even thinks in those terms. It's used as a contrast between the finite and the infinite set. That's not what he's saying. We're talking about our finite existence. Look, we have 7 billion people on this planet. If you go back simply in time, there had to be one person that it began with. It can't go endlessly. 7 billion people didn't go endlessly. Because if 5 people are here, you have to say those 5 came from 4, came from 3, 2, 1. You're going to get back to 1. And who put that 1 there? you're going to get always to that problem. Same problem with the first ball of gas. You can speak about billions of years of existence of a universe, but you always get back to who put the first ball of gas there. There has to be something that put it there. Yeah, I know they like to say it goes infinitely back. It's a nice, cute thing, but it's not mathematically correct and not logically correct. I just said, let's not make it billions. Let's say you have five individuals on Earth, and they look at each other. They say, "Who are your parents?" They say, "Well, they live there." And who are their parents? You can go back at somebody. Who are the first parents? You're going to end up with a place where you have to come to a place where the yesh can't be creating the yesh, unless the first one you say created himself. You're going to have to say it's self-created, but that's obviously has its own problems because nothing creates itself. We don't create ourselves.
We're talking about Ein Techila.
I don't know what that means, but I'm talking about basically he's saying like this, that a yesh
95.
yesh miyesh ad bli tachlis.
Chapter 95 discusses the whole thing also. From the world we could come to understand it is.
Yeah, that part, yeah, but I was referring to, 95, Tzadikeh. He's going to, I think, refer to it soon. And he's explaining now, this argument itself, this logic itself it has two elements to it. One is, besides the fact that a yesh from a yesh, one entity from another cannot come without some type of a vacuum or void in between, like it says elsewhere, because like you see, a child is not just an extension like a branch of a tree. A child goes through literally a state of, before a child is born, parents have to conceive, and an egg has to be fertilized, then it starts with one cell, and then it develops. So that's number one, that every yesh needs an ayin in between. In addition to that, that to say one yesh comes from another yesh without end, that's something that is logically impossible. And now he adds in the parentheses why. Because this whole inyan of a yesh, meaning anything of substance in this world, is hagbola, is finite. So how could something that is finite be without end, which is the opposite of its personality? Its personality is defined. So you're saying it's defined in unlimited way. It's limited, but unlimited fashion. And therefore you have to say that it has an end. Or Hainu Haschola, has a beginning, has an edge, has a beginning point. Like the Rambam writes in the Guide of Perplexed, Bagdomis, in his preface, in his introductions, Yesh miyesh bli tachlias hu sheker gomor. To say something a yesh miyesh without end, without beginning, actually, is a total lie. Sheker gomor is an impossibility, basically. It doesn't mean lie, because he's talking philosophically. In his term, sheker means a logical impossibility.
False.
Understood or not understood? I know you'll have many debates with this with people in the modern scientific world, because they'll say, why not? But they also say, even without any Torah of faith at all, they all say it's 3 billion years old, 4 billion years old. What does that mean? And what was the day when it was born?
They come back to a Big Bang eventually, of some
right, a Big Bang,
singularity,
right?
Event. But that's the beginning. That's Ein Techila, which the Rebbe mentions.
No, so no, but
Ein Techila.
No, but if
Kates.
Kates sometimes means Techila. Kates just means an edge.
We're not saying
Yesh lo Kates. It
has nothing to do with Techila and Sofer. That's not the point here. No connection here. It's either way. Just like they can't begin, they have to have an end. The same reason. Same reasoning. The thing is, but when you ask them what's happened before the Big Bang, they say, well, we don't know. We have no idea what happened. That's what the answer is. No one argues that it was here forever. They all say it's a matter of time, but it's to happen at some point in
But they
time.
do say there's an infinitely expanding universe.
I don't know what that word means.
That means it goes on forever.
No, but it doesn't. They say it's all going to burn out. Why do you say that? They say it's all going to burn out.
Reading. Infinitely expanding universe.
First of all, we're not talking about expanding. We're talking beginning now. They all spoken.
Okay, so that's different.
So why don't they say the same thing backwards? Why don't they say it was infinitely concentrated? It infinitely concentrated, infinitely expanding. And second of all, who cares what they say? The question is, what's the logic? To say it's infinitely, anybody can say what they want. There's no proof for that. It's a theory. That's for sure a theory. No one knows the future. Maybe it's not infinitely expanding. Just like there was a beginning. Why can't it? Generally speaking, you say l'kol tichl yesh ket, l'kol tichl. Everything has a beginning, has an end. That's also a logical statement. But I'm not talking about the end part. That also was discussed earlier, right? That's what we spoke about Ein Sof, right? That was 95. So from the Habriya shows you It's a whole discussion earlier also. Even the main thing. Look. We also believe Lo Yush Besu, that the sun and all the celestial bodies are as powerful as they were the day they were created.
They're just forever.
They won't be forever, but
Don't we say that in Chumash, where Shemaim and Arts, that God says they'll live forever?
No.
not forever. While they're standing, they are there without any diminishment, as if they'll be forever. But desire is that only 6,000 years. That's what it says. Chapter 95, it talks about that. But the bottom line is, he's essentially, what we're doing is extrapolating by studying and examining and understanding the nature of a finite entity. You come to realize that it could not have put itself there, and it could not have endlessly and infinitely go backwards. It had to have some place where something put it there. And you must say, you have to say that it came from a thing that had no substance. It cannot be something like itself. Couldn't be a yesh miyesh endlessly. You have to say at some point it came from loy davar, from something that has no yesh. That is like something that does not have substance. Like from a nothing came a something. And that's what we call, that means the ayin eliki, the divine force. That is completely different than the object itself. V'gam, another part of this is bonus. This is all what we're supposed to be contemplating on when you think about God. And we're coming from the yesh. You're coming to extrapolate what the divine force. Another thing, the kol mitzias yesh hu murkav. Any existence, anything of substance, is murkav, is a hybrid, is made up of parts. Shekhenhu b'chol mitzias. This is true in all existence. Shenivra behechrich. B'chol mitzias shenivra. This is true with anything that has been created. Behechrich sheyesh be'erkove. You have to say that it has it's a compound of different elements. Compound. Gama chema rishon hu murkav. Even the chema rishon, this is an expression used, the Ramban, it's from the Ramban, in the beginning of Bereshis. He said that first it was all created like one raw piece of matter, and then it was split up into parts. We see this also in everything. Everything begins with a seed, and then it develops. So existence not just pops out there. There's a process, and a chema rishon means the first matter. Essentially, the first matter that God put there. So it's murkav. It's also made up of parts. It's a compound. So if that's the case, why is it called chema rishon? So just relative to the four shapes that are shaped, that are designed, that are shaped and designed from it. Hu pashat legabeim. He's simple or plain compared to them, meaning like raw, unshaped. But he's also murkav. Because the word murkav means when something is made up of components, a compound means it doesn't have one element, it has several elements. It's made up of several elements. So you could say the first raw matter How could you say that's a murkav? Maybe it's just raw and doesn't have any other elements. He says it also has. It's just not relative to the shape that will come from it. Like think of let's say a raw piece of clay that will be turned into a beautiful pottery. So yes, there's no question that the pot is far more. You could see clearly the pottery is made up of shape, and therefore you can see it's a compound. You could say the raw clay, maybe it's not a compound, but we know raw clay is also a compound. It's just not yet visible.
What are these four soros specifically?
Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer. Sometimes it's called Chaymer Hiyuli in some places. Okay. V'hainu shemurkav ma'yisedis. What it means murkav? It means it's murkav from the elements. It's a compound from the elements. You say this literally means foundations, but it's foundational elements. The Rebbe explains in some letters when people asked him that today we know that the table of elements is far more than 4. It's 100 and whatever it is. 120 today. A little less.
No.
A little more. Like oxygen and hydrogen, etc. So the Rebbe answers several answers. Number one is he says that the 4, basically it goes back to Greek philosophy that the Greeks established the 4. So, which is the first place you see it. Maybe you have it also in Medrash, but at the same time. So the Rebbe's answer is that number one, even if they're all the elements, talking about the 4 general ones, 4 archetypes, is what the Rebbe says. Archetypes. They're not elements as in oxygen, hydrogen, but they're archetypes. And number 2, the Rebbe says elsewhere also in the letter that you see even the atom now. The atom is made up of 4 elements also as well. You have the electron, it's like Aish. You have a neutron and a proton. And there's the what do they call them? The quarks that include all the other subatomic particles. Yeah. I don't know which is which, but the Aish I know is the electron. Mayim, Ruach, Ofer. So again, it's also archetypal, because it's not, the atom doesn't have fire as in physical fire, but Aish, the Dal Yuseides doesn't mean physical fire. We learned about Aish Yuseid, Ha'aish, it means archetypes. Not actual 4. It's not like earth, water, wind and fire in physical terms. It's like 4 archetypes that evolve into those 4 elements. But anyway, back to this, so he's saying, so murkav. So everything in this world is made up of these parts. There's nothing in existence, in the physical existence, that is not made up of, is not a compound. Shemurkav ma'yisedis, umurkav meguf v'nefesh chemer v'tzura. So besides that, it's made up of the elements. It's also made up of a body, a spirit, a raw piece of matter, and a shape. It's interesting. It calls it 4 things: guf, nefesh, chemer, tzura. So guf and nefesh. Let's say you even take a piece of let's say I said clay. So if guf and nefesh would be the physical body of it, the nefesh would be the whatever nefesh adememis, whatever gives it life, sustenance. Chemer would be the raw, and sura would be its shape. Okay, I think that's what he's saying, but.
Chemer would be the material of what it's made of.
Yeah, that's what I meant, the raw material. And sura is the shape you make it has. Well, you have, for example, even natural shapes. There's things that grow a certain way.
Even if it doesn't have a shape, the fact that it's there, it's a tzura.
Right. No, that's for sure. Definition of existence is chemer and sura. That's a given. And nefesh and guf, yeah. Take a flower.
In the Homer.
I think guf and nefesh, I would say, take a flower. So flower, the guf of the flower is the body of the flower. We're not getting now into what it's made of. Just the pure body, that there's a body. The nefesh is the nefesh tzemechas, the force that tells it to grow. The vegetation force, the growth. That's clear.
Gives it life.
Then you have chemer would be, what is it made of? It's made of, it has elements it's made of.
Actual substance.
In other words, the guf is just a description of a body of it. It doesn't say what the body is made of. Chemer is what is the substance? Is it made of, for example, a flower will have water for sure. There'll be some earth. Probably the other elements as well. Different combinations. And surah is already the shape of the flower. Is it, a rose? looks like that. Its petals is the chaymer, and the shape of the flower, the image that it projects. Okay? And any compound that is made up of elements cannot be self-sustained existence, because it needs something else. Interesting. Sometimes the explanation given is murkav means you need a markiv. If something is a compound, you need someone to mix them together. Because how they get that? Here he's not saying that here. Here he's saying that being that they are made up of elements, you cannot say they're self-made, because everyone is dependent on another. So dependent on another means that they can't have created themselves. They need something else to exist. Why can't you say all of them just made themselves? Okay, back for the first reason, because yesh can't go forever. I don't know. Let's take away that reason. So because I'm murkiv. Well, intuitively it makes sense. Something that is made up, if it's made up of parts, means it needs those parts. And
each part of it is it. Then you can break it down even further. Then each part.
But each part is always also murkiv. Like he says, even chemadishon, there's no such thing as not murkiv.
Keep on going forever.
Simply put, this house no way made it itself. Why? Because it's made up of parts. It had to be put here. The parts needed each other. It didn't just come from nowhere. So parts had to be combined. Maybe it is connected to that, someone put it, but it's basically saying, because it needs a davar, it's dependent on something else, it tells you that it doesn't have self-sustained power. That's what it means. Because it's dependent on something. That's what he's saying. Maybe there's a different explanation, because once you depend on something, so you can't be self-sustained, because that thing, without that, you wouldn't exist. So you don't have that. You don't have the ability to be self-sustained. That's in the most basic level.
But then you keep on stirring.
Let's say a flower. Just an example. A flower must have a seed. Okay, it must have water. So if it must have all those things, it could not have self-sustained, because it needs those things. If those things didn't exist, it wouldn't exist. So something preceded it, so to speak. Maybe that's what he means. As he says, yeah, it's like saying, it's the reason I'm trying to find these things, because it's easy to say, okay, if something put it there, but that goes back to the first proof. The first proof says no yesh can go yesh forever, but also the way it is, because it's made up of things and it's dependent on another. So a child is dependent on a parent, so the child cannot have made himself. But that's more the first proof. This is what he says. Let's move on. If someone has an explanation, I'm not positive. To look.
In this case, what's the nefesh? If you have to add something that's sustaining it, what's the nefesh? What is it?
Well, let's take a human being. A human being has a nefesh that enters the being. That means we're murkiv of a nefesh and a guf, for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good example. So that's a proof. There's no way that the guf could have created itself, because the guf, we wouldn't be us if we didn't have a soul.
Okay. But then we go.
Because once something is made up of parts, it cannot be self-sustained. Because those parts are coming from different places.
If we say guf and nefesh, why do we have to add the other two? That's what I'm.
No, because that's what it is. Because that's what means a full murkav, a full compound, has also chemer and surah. He's just laying it out in detail, that everything is made up of that as well. So, since we have a soul, and without a soul we'll never be, so we're dependent on that. So without that, that's the logic. You have to say that's what he means. Since it's made up of parts that are not itself. No, it's not self-sustaining. It's not like the human being emerges and has a bunch of parts that it just gathers. It's made up of parts that had to come from somewhere. So it cannot have been made by itself. That's, I think, the simplest way of explaining it. So all of this shows that from the yesh itself, by thinking about the existence of our existence, it compels us to say that it was created from an ayin eliki, from a completely different reality, divine energy. V'zeu ha'soga is bonus kloli d'isavas hayesh hu ma'ayin. So this whole piece came to explain what's the general contemplation, and that is the general contemplation of Isavas HaYesh U'Ma'ayin, that the creation of the Yesh comes from something beyond, from a different reality. Yeah. But that's not enough. You also need to have. We need, and it has to be also. Not also, he doesn't say so. It has to be contemplation bepratis, in detail. Because this just tells you in general that the yesh comes from something beyond itself. What the details? What the details are, more specifically, is the echus, the personality, the quality, I would say. The quality of this ayin. Because all this till now doesn't tell you anything about the ayin. All it tells you is the yesh needs an ayin, but it doesn't tell you what this ayin is like. So now we're talking about the quality of the ayin. That gets into a more detailed contemplation. What is this detail now? Even though Isavas Yeshmein is a infinitely distant way, because we just said it's not yesh miyesh. It's not like a drop of water developed into a body of water, which would be yesh miyesh. So a drop of water developed a body of water developed into an ocean. So you retrace the steps, and it can't go infinitely black. Who put the first drop of water there? So that's the ayin eliki. That may be also a good example, because the water is also made up of different elements. So that also testifies that nothing could have been self-made, because it needs other elements. Okay. But now we know that the ayin eliki is not like the yesh. It's not like a drop compared to an ocean. It's infinitely distant. That's the whole point. Which means in a state of distance, from a distance, a detached distance. Which is the reason that this became a yesh. Because if it was not distant, then the yesh would be like the ayin. It would not sense itself as a self-absorbed entity. It would be ethereal and constantly sensing its source. The mere fact that the yesh can deny its source and live a self-absorbed life testifies that whatever put it here did it in a very distant way. Because if someone was holding your hand, there's no way your hand could do whatever it wants. It knows that there's something putting your hand there. We don't sense the source, so that alone tells you that the way it came to be is from distance. B'kol mokim. So then the question, of course, is: so how can we contemplate about it? That's the question. How could you contemplate on something that is that distant? B'kol mokim, nevertheless, b'hechrich, we have to say, gamkin b'hechrich gamkin lemer. We have to also say sheyesh kiru v'shaychus ha'ayin alayesh. That there has to be some closeness and some relationship between the ayin yesh, in order for there to be the Isavas HaYesh. So yes, it's done through distance, but to say it's completely two different worlds is also not correct. There has to be some relationship between the two. Now parentheses. And this is the difference between the true root of all creation, which is from Atzmus. What is it from Atzmus? Like he says in that only he has the power and the ability to create a yesh, because he's the only one that is a yesh that has no cause that causes him to be, so he can create a yesh that should feel that it has no cause. That taka is ein arech legamri. That's completely infinitely distant. Like we say, ein arech lecha, nothing comparable to you in Elam Haza. Elam Haza testifies to an ein arech of Atzmus that's completely infinitely distant. But that's not what we're talking about here. That is Atzmus, is a completely different reality, and it has no yesh. That's what he says. He has no cause, and therefore he can create something without cause. That is completely detached, and that is something we'll never understand. But there's another element, he says here, this is the distinction between Amitis Sherish Esavas, the true root of creation, and Esavas Ayin Eliki is not Atzmos. We're talking now the divine force that is a diminished flow of energy from Atzmos that is actually is the creative process of bringing something into being. That, he says, is taka distant. But this one already has, at the end of the day, some form of closeness. This is at least the rotzen, the desire to create. Atzmus, there's no desire even. Atzmus.
God became the only thing like the godly process for things.
Yeah.
That what it is?
That's one aspect of it, but it's even deeper than that. Atzmus, I told you many times, it's out of our realm. It's
But that's God.
the essence of God. It's all God, but there's God in His. Look, when you speak about the essence of God, the core essence of God, you're talking about something that is everything we know, but much more that we'll never know. You have to say that. But that God wanted an existence with logic, and He wanted us to have a relationship with God. So only Atzmus alone, then you don't need whole Seder Shtalshus. God doesn't need a Tzimtzum, He doesn't need Eidei and Sof, He doesn't need Eidus and Kalim, nor Atzilas Bri Yitzir Asiyah. I've explained this many times here. He wants a relationship with existence. As such, He manifests the ultimate root power comes from Atzmus, but He manifests it in a progressive system that has a relationship with the levels below it. Some relationships are close, some relationships are distant. So here He's saying it's distant on one hand, but it's not completely distant. There's a kiruv, and that means that He desires. So desire is already God's essence manifesting in a level that is connecting to something outside of the essence core. Ubchinas Malchus, that Atzilus hu harotzen lahavas b'poel. And Malchus, of Atzilus, the level of Malchus, that's the desire to actually bring things into creation. Like he writes about this in Hemshech Samar Vov. One second. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Just want to see what the next line is.
This is always the bottom line to clear it up for me.
Yeah.
We say that on one level that we say it's intellectual. We just said it earlier. It's impossible that Yesh can have that there's no such thing as no creation. It has to have a creator. It has to have a beginning. It has something that it created. It's sorich l'davar. And that it doesn't. There's no such thing as ultimate simplicity. It has to be more. Yeah. So we say intellectually, it's impossible that these three things, can't be. But then we say, when we talk about Atzmus, God, what we normally say God. But then we say God doesn't have a techila, ain't techila. We say that God doesn't have is a simplicity. It doesn't have is total unity. It doesn't have anything more kav. And then we say it's also nobody ever created it. It created itself. So on one side we say when we talk about the yesh in this world, we say intellectually it's impossible, it's illogical, it's irrational to believe these three things. It doesn't have a creator. There's something has to have a creator. It has to be morkav, and it has to have. And yet at the same time we say when we say about God, we only have our faith of our.
This is 87.
He's asking a good question.
Yeah, the basis of the faith is that God, we intellectually accept that He has all three of those things. We say, or we throw so to speak, we throw our logic out the window and say, but when we talk about God, all these three things that we say are an intellectual impossibility exist by God.
You never come to an answer to anybody's never come to an answer to this? You have no answer for this?
I don't have an answer.
Give it a little thought and you'll come to an answer, because many people have this question because they miss the whole point, actually. Number one is that if you really extrapolate this, or broaden what he's saying here to a real conceptual level, he answers this question. We'll move that away from there. Assume nothing right now. Even if you do not believe in God, you have no way of knowing if there's a God. If you just went from a process of elimination, from the bottom up, what would you conclude? Without any biases. I'm not talking about someone who's invested in not being responsible and not wanting to have a creator, We're talking about a pure logical system, like Avraham Avinu. He went out looking, he knew one thing for sure, that's not the idols that his generation was worshipping. How did he know? Maybe they are. Maybe there's some stones that have power. Because he tested it. He saw stones. He also logically said, why should this stone have more power than this stone? How could this stone have created this stone? Makes no sense. And he realized it was a business, basically. So what did he do? He went through a process of elimination. The Rambam writes this in the beginning of Hilchos Avodah Zarah. What did he do? You extrapolate. Okay, if it's not the stones, so what is it? Maybe my father is God. No, that can't be. He had a father. And you go back to the first father, that he was a human being. So then he looked into heaven and earth. He looked at the skies. He said the sun, moon. He literally went through this process here. He had his abundance of the key. What was the matter with the sun? The sun looks very powerful. Maybe the sun put it all here. I'm talking about completely, think of it like a childish approach, literally looking for, is this all self-made? What is there something bigger than what we sense? And he sees the sun, then he sees the sun set, and then the moon. So whether he knew astronomy or not makes no difference, but it was clear to him at some point that the sun and moon are just more of the same thing. They're just bigger, and they're more distant, and they seem awesome. But they're just another part of existence. I'm not putting words into Rambam or the Avram, but I'm translating the way I would understand it. You can see the sun is like a stone here, but it's in heaven, and it's very big, and it gives a lot of light. So what? It's just a bigger, finite object. What did he come to? Where did Avram come to suddenly realize what God is? He came through the process of elimination. He had no revelation yet. He was searching. And then he came to the biggest realization of them all. And this is the key. That he has a major mistake, there's a major flaw in his whole approach. He's making it like, I'm going to figure out what put me here. But I'm only a part of the whole. How could the part ever dictate the whole? So he realized that the whole, whatever that whole is, call it whatever name, God, cannot be dictated by the part, because if he put me here, I'm one little speck of a far bigger thing. He came to realize that God is not the sum total of nature, like Spinoza pantheism, because that didn't make any sense. Then what put it there? It can't self-perpetuate. He came to realize there has to be another reality that's completely different than our reality, that can put something there, and who says logic applies there? Here, this world, we work with logic, but whatever put it here must have something that we don't have, something that is not defined by these rules. Because if it's just another sun, or it's a bigger sun, or it's a bigger yesh, back to the same problem. So he came through process of elimination, saying that it must be something completely nothing that exists like here. That's how we come to realize. And that's what Avraham Avinu realized, that he better stop searching. He should maybe just stop searching, and maybe that reality will emerge. And that's what happened. He didn't find God. God found him when he stopped, when he lowered his yesh to a point where he could absorb something beyond himself. That's what happened. So, through process of elimination, without revelation yet, he knew that whatever God is not nothing that's similar to this existence. It has to be, cannot be governed by these rules. And there are rules in nature. Now, if you want to say, let's apply no logic and say existence just exists forever without logic, that doesn't make sense. Logic can't make such a statement. Logic can't say it's illogical. Logic can argue that there's something that put logic here, but you can't, in the world of logic, somebody come up with everything is logical in science except one thing: we were here forever. Because that's not a logical statement. It's not nature's logic doesn't lead to such a conclusion. No one says such a thing. As I said, even the greatest non-believers will say the world is 5 billion, 4 billion, 3 billion, 2 billion. But when I've even heard once a debate between two atheists, and one said, "Why? So why do we have to say there's no? Why maybe there's no beginning?" And they said you can't say that because logic doesn't allow you to say that. So why don't they go there? Why do they have to say it has a beginning? Because at the end of the day, for 2 billion, once you get them saying it's like Churchill's line, once you already have a beginning, okay, yours is 2 billion, mine is 1 billion, and ours is 6,000. It's just a matter of numbers. And once it has a beginning, it has a beginning. The point I'm making here is that you extrapolate from the existence that something that put it here is completely different than its existence, and once it's completely different, yes, it's not bound by the laws of logic, including the logic. So all the logic that we apply to this world doesn't apply there, because then it loses its power as God. If you start applying the logic of existence to God, then He's not God, then He's not another part of this existence. So you have to say that it comes from a completely different place. That's Chassidus' ultimate. There were philosophers that said God is the ultimate mind, He's the ultimate logic. But then you'll fall into the problem that you have. Well, if that's the case, why don't we? Who created God? If God is just the beginning of it all, He's the first yesh. Then your question is absolutely legitimate. Ultimately, you have to come to the conclusion He's completely different, and then He chose to want existence like we have it, and wants a relationship, and therefore manifests in ways that make it that is more commensurate to us. I mean, to me, it's got nothing to do with faith. If there's a God, it's only possible such a God. The rest is meaningless. The rest is just a play of words. It's just another name for a human being that's bigger than us, a bigger king, a bigger leader, or whatever, invisible. Who cares? You end up having the problem. So that what you're saying is exactly a result of this. You have to say it's completely different, and therefore in every possible way, that you can't apply the question who created God, because that question is only applicable to a yesh like ours. Now, you can't apply it. It doesn't make any sense. Then it's not God if you can ask such a question.
So then our knowledge of God should only be shlila. We can't know anything. So then how can we make a positive statement?
Okay, that
he's ain't techila, that we're saying that he had no beginning. Maybe he did have a beginning.
Okay, no, good question.
And maybe he is more common.
And
maybe somebody didn't God.
No.
If we don't want line of understanding, maybe these.
No, and Chassidus, why don't you listen? I just said it before, because we believe that our God wanted us to have an understanding in Him, and He not limits Himself to completely not being understood. He chose to be understood.
This one that's this level here, that's
right. That's the whole.
What about the ayin oroch lacha ba'olam hazeh?
No, because then you're talking. Yeah, then you're talking in this. Yeah.
But when we talk about the infinite God,
so maybe you're not talking about. Maybe you're not talking about.
We're talking about that level. That's completely.
First of all, I would say I've never heard anyone really speak about Atzmos. Everything they speak is always on lower levels. I don't care what they call it, because they don't know how to speak about Atzmos.
When we say the first pasuk in Shema, we're talking about Atzmos. Echad.
You're talking about God as you understand Him. It's in your terms. It's I wouldn't even say it's the Ayin Eliki. It's probably God in Asiya Gashmi.
We're saying stage.
No.
This level here, though.
We don't look. Discuss it. Once again, I want to say two things. In Torah Shalom, he says it, and I say it to you clearly. When people talk about Atzmos, it's not Atzmos. It's Atzmos as they understand Atzmos.
It's the second level.
Or even higher than the second, but it's still not the Atzmos.
This is the highest level that he's talking about. That's Ein Oro completely.
There are places in Chassidus that talk about the highest level, but most of us don't even get there because we are unable to get there. You can't get there if you don't go through the lower levels. There's no way there. So I want to just conclude. I want to say the following. That number one is most people don't talk really about Atzmos. They're talking about levels of Atzmos in... Even the non-logic of Atzmos is also relative to our logic. Let's put it that way. And more importantly, because Atzmos is not bound by being non-logic, even Atzmos, ultimately, with the right Avodah and enough work, you can come to even understand that which was non-understandable. That itself is not logical to you, right? But Atzmos can do that too. But it can only be if you come to it through a lot of hard work. God will not do a miracle for anybody like that. That's why He said to Moshe Rabbeinu, no man can see me and live. Last week's Pasha. But there's ways to see Him without, there's other ways. Or through not looking, as the Panim Yafis, the Rebbe explains. The point I'm trying to make is 2 points. That you have to come to a point to understand Atzmos is completely different than us. And when you're ready to have the bittul to enter there, you can even appreciate that, even in logic, at the end of the day. Because ultimately the one that created logic is beyond logic and is beyond logic. Remember that. He's not bound to being beyond logical. He's not bound to logic either. And there comes a point where the beyond logic manifests even in logic. That's Mashiach. That's ultimate idea. We learned about it. We learned Primis Bina. Primis Bina and Primis Chacham become Primis Atik. That you actually have a comprehension in that which was once incomprehensible. But that takes a lot of. There's no magic to get there. You have to learn a lot of chassidus to get to that point.
But would you agree that would you agree with the statement that this atzmus level, at the highest level of atzmus, that is not shaykh at all to logic, not logic, it's just his ain makshava, his makshava is not our makshava, that you can't say anything but shlila about him? That level. Or you're saying that even this...
At this point, yeah, but at this point I would say you can't say anything about shlila.
Anything but shlila.
Right now, at your stage where you are right now, but there's a stage you can come that you can get like more than shlila.
The Arizal, these highest...
To some extent, yeah.
They can get to the level, this highest level of atzmus that is not...
Well, even them not complete until the Geula. That's why nobody, even in the Shar Hanun, nobody got to the 50th gate. Because there's always, as long as there's somewhat of a dissonance and dichotomy between existence and God, among us, even Tzaddikim are affected by that. Remember, they're in a Neshama Klolis, so they're affected by our dissonance too. There's no such thing as somebody just being a blina. That's why the Gemara says 3 people died only by Itav Shel Nachash. They didn't have to die, but only because of the Chatei Das. That's why they died. So it's not about them, it's because they carry it's like the Arizal said, Al Chet, for the generation. So as long as there's a dissonance where Elokus is not totally begoli. Let's put it this way, if you don't have Mamala Kalaman in place, you don't have Seva Kalaman in place, you're not getting to Atzmus. Now, do we have tastes of it? Yes. An Ish Pashat. When you do something simple, it touches Atzmus. That doesn't mean you have it in comprehension. It means that you touch Atzmus. When you make a Dir B'Tachtenim, you go out of your comfort zone, you're touching Atzmus in certain ways. But touching is not comprehending. Touching means that through a mitzvah you can reach far higher places than through learning. Because the action does something up there that we don't really fully understand. But Mashiach essentially is the fusion of a structure. That's where I began my whole introduction today. The fusion of structure with beyond structure connects to Atzmus. Remember, when you talk about Atzmus, you're talking about a level that is here right now, there's no tzimtzum, there's no gilui, nothing changes. Atzmus is here and we don't understand what it means by being here. He's here, not in the way we define here. Giluyim are here, but concealed. Giluyim can be more revealed. They are subject to the levels. The expression "bilti mitzias nimtza." That's the closest description of Atzmus. We say a non-existential existence. Essentially, it's saying he exists, but no definitions that we call exists.
An unknowable existence.
I didn't say that word. No, not I wouldn't say. Bilti mitzias nimtza, not bilti yediyah. Don't fit your own words here. Bilti mitzias, yeah. It means he exists in a non-existential way. Everything we define, when we define what means something exists, those definitions don't apply to him. Not just we see it. When we say something exists, an idea exists, that doesn't apply. Because it's it's like when the Rebbe Rashab once said that atheists are one step closer sometimes to the truth than believers. Because when they say God doesn't exist, it's far more real than when we say God exists. Because what does it mean God exists? He exists like we exist. That's not true. They're saying he doesn't exist is truer than they're saying that. Can you imagine that?
So when the Rambam starts Al Yad Chazaka with Yesod is Matzoi Rishon, and the only emes of his existence is the only truth.
He's not talking about, not Atzmus, no.
He's not talking about
Chassidus clearly says it's not Atzmus. First of all, Matzoi Rishon immediately means Rishon. He's already Mamalikal. That's like God is. That's why he says V'imi al adashu hu eina Matzoi. That's save of Kalam. But he never goes to Atzmus really. Atzmus is a Chassidus thing. Not the Rambam did not talk about Atzmus. I mean, again, what you mean by Atzmus depends what you mean. Atzmus is a very broad word. There's some people use the word Atzmus and they think they're talking about the highest level. It's far from the highest. Trust me, if you had someone who really knew godliness, explain to you Mamala Kalam, and you'd think that's the highest level possible. We talk Atzmus because we've got accustomed to just throwing ourselves with words. Mamala Kalaman is deep enough, trust me, to understand God, understand the divine energy within existence. You get that well, and then we'll talk business. Samach Vav uses the expression also, I think, in Ayin Beis, that when you say about Atma, it says Shlilas HaShlila v'Shlilas HaChiyuv, v'Shlilas HaShlilas HaChiyuv v'Shlilas HaShlila. You understand what that means? That it negates the positive and negates the negative and negates the negative of the negative. So it's not even Shlila. It's like you can't talk it's anything. You can't say it's this, you can't say it's not this, and you can't say it's not this.
Right.
See, when you say Chachma, when you say Machshavei Shalem Machshavei Seichem, that's one level. His thoughts are not our thought, but he has thoughts. Then there's a place where it's not even a thought. As I said, you have to go through the lower levels to get to that type of sense of it, because without it, first you have to relate to a level that is not like us. Then you can start saying, okay, and then figure out what's not like us and not like us. You understand? You have to go all the way back before you can come forward. And then he chooses to manifest in. Now we have a taste of this. I can give you many examples of Atzmus in our feelings. That's the Chiddush in Tanya, one of the last things Alter Rebbe wrote, what he quoted now. The mere fact that we can live a life and feel that we have no source, the Alter Rebbe said it must come from an Atzmus. That reveals that there's an Atzmus that has actually no source. Because where would we get this feeling from? Anything that has a source cannot convey to you something it doesn't have. Oyer has a source and knows it has a source. So how could it create us and without us feeling the source? So you have to say that whatever gave us that sense has no real source. That's the Alter Rebbe's one of the last statements he made. It's a major chiddush. No one ever said it before him. Because usually you'd say the fact that we don't feel we have a source is a negative. And that's our selfishness. We're blind, so we think we're self-made. Like Pari, he thought self-made. The Alter Rebbe say, no, the mere fact that Yesh dictates, I'm here to stay, and I don't feel I have a beginning. We don't even feel our parents are our beginning. That sense of eternal existence while you're here, you don't feel like you're 30 years from birth and 30 years from death. You don't feel like that, That alone tells you that there's something planting that sense in us, and it has to be a truth. And he says that's proof of Atzmus. One of the proofs that Atzmus has to have, there has to be a level that has no yesh, siba, illa v'siba. It's a deep concept, but it's something to think about, right? So next time you're feeling very self-made, you could say that's Atzmus at work. Except in the distortion is that you think you're actually, I'm God. So it's a long chapter anyway. Let me just finish here to a certain line. And being ma'acher, and since there has to be a kiruv, ayin b'kiruv aliyesh. Remember, now God wanted there should be a relationship. You have to say that there's an order, a progressive order. How this ayin aliki transmits from level to level till it becomes close to being a source for the yesh. And now he's going to go back to something we learned all the way back earlier. Zehu harichas hizbon is the Baruch Sha'amar. Remember that?
Yeah.
And this is the long hizbon. He's talking about what you do by davening. This is what you should be contemplating. The Baruch Sha'amar. I just want to see if I should go continue. I think we should stop here, because he goes now and spells out all the levels we learned about Baruch Sha'amar. But that's where he's going now. So it's connecting. We have to now go back to everything we learned then is now getting back here. So everything Atzmos. If you remember Baruch Sha'amar, by the way, he spoke about the 5 levels. And all the way to the highest level, Atzmos. There too. But again, that's all relative. 1 second. So Baruch Sha'amar. Hold on. This is the end of Baruch Sha'amar. So let's sum up what we learned here. This beginning of this chapter. This is supposed to be avodah, not a scholar. It's getting by the way. So what's the Avodah here? Okay. So he says we need to have, to understand all this in Avodas Hashem, we have to have the contemplation in the divine, which brings out Vayira. This is fundamental. Number one, to refining your animal soul and everything, tikkun, and also for mitzvahs to be fulfilled in the fullest possible way. That's the tachlis, the whole purpose of why the neshama comes down. And the Avayira has to be through his bonus. What's the his bonus? First general contemplation, then a specific. The general contemplation is that the yesh dictates, from the yesh you come to realize there has to be an ayin. Two reasons. One is because the yesh is finite and therefore cannot go back endlessly. It can't go back endlessly.
Can I go further than see you?
It doesn't say that here.
Before he said that.
But not here. Because it's not relevant here. He wants to say it comes with yesh ma'ayin, not saying what happens after. He's saying where it comes from. Yeah? And the second, because it's a murkav. It's made up of parts. It's a compound. And a murkav, it cannot be, he says, it cannot be something that's self-made because it needs others. Dependent. Essentially, it's dependent. As soon as it's dependent on something, it can't be self-made. Okay, that's pretty much it. And then he says, then we need to have also contemplation specifically. What specifically? Not just to know it comes from ayin, but what is this ayin like? But the ayin is distant from us. So he says, even though it's distant, it's made in a way that's also has some relationship with us, so we can contemplate on it. He hasn't gotten to the details of what we contemplate, but you could contemplate. That's because it's not like atzmus, which is completely a different reality. As a matter of fact, I would say something, I don't know if I've ever heard it, but I would say the fact that Atzmos allows Eir to come from him, that goes through progression, that we can relate to, in some ways is even a bigger chiddush than Atzmos being completely another reality. Because being another reality, okay, fine, he's in his world, he created subjects in this world, and we're finite creatures, but they should create that such a contradiction, that finite creatures should be able to climb a ladder that initially that's proportionate to them, to get a place that's completely beyond, that's beyond. That's a pretty big achievement, I would say. This God is a pretty interesting personality. Okay, so we'll stop here. We did the first half of chapter 150, first third of chapter 150, page 293.